So, you want to buy a private island. You've seen the drone shots. The white sand, the turquoise water, the house on the hill with no neighbors for miles. Just you, the ocean, and the kind of silence that costs more per square foot than anything else on Earth. Here's what the drone shot doesn't show you. The island you're looking at has no power, no running water, no sewage system, and no way to get a bag of groceries to your front door without a boat, a dock, and a man you pay year-round to operate both, whether you're there or not. The cheapest private island on the market right now is about $74,000. A quarter-acre rock in a Nicaraguan lake with a solar panel and a dock. The most expensive sale in recent memory was $60 million, for 2 islands in the U.S. Virgin Islands that nobody wanted to touch because the previous owner was Jeffrey Epstein. And in between those 2 numbers is a market that runs on a single rule that almost nobody talks about. It's called the 1.8 times rule, and it means the listing price of an undeveloped island is typically only about 55% of what you'll actually spend. A $2 million island costs roughly $3.6 million before you can sleep there. So today, we're going to do the math. What it actually costs to buy a private island, what it costs to make it livable, what it costs to keep it alive every year after that, who's done it, who's lost everything doing it, and why the single most expensive thing about owning an island is not the island. Let's start with the purchase. The global market for private islands is surprisingly large and surprisingly cheap at the bottom end. You can buy a small, undeveloped island in Nova Scotia, Canada for under $100,000. Parts of Maine, the coast of Belize, and Lake Islands in Sweden regularly list for under $250,000. These are raw land. No buildings, no utilities, no dock. Just a title deed and a GPS coordinate. Move up to the Caribbean and you're in a different conversation. The Bahamas is the largest private island market on Earth. Over 700 islands and keys, a freehold ownership system that allows foreigners to buy with the same rights as Bahamian citizens. No income tax, no capital gains tax, no inheritance tax, and a location 90 miles from Florida. A small, undeveloped Bahamian island runs somewhere between $500,000 and $2 million. Add a basic house, a dock, a water system, and you're looking at $1 to $5 million. A developed island with a main residence, guest houses, a functioning dock, solar power, and desalination will cost you anywhere from $10 to $50 million. And those are the listings you actually see in the magazines. But the purchase price is genuinely the cheap part. Here's the line item nobody puts in the brochure. An undeveloped island has no electricity, no fresh water, no septic system, no way to get on or off, and no contractor within 100 miles who can build any of those things at mainland prices. Start with power. If you're close enough to the mainland, you can run a submarine power cable. That costs over $1 million per mile. Most island buyers aren't close enough, so they go solar. A solar system large enough to power a modest house on a private island runs between $500,000 and $2 million. That's before the battery storage, which you need because the sun goes down and there's no grid to fall back on. Now, water. Islands don't have municipal water. If you're lucky, you have a well. If you're not, you're installing a desalination system, which takes seawater and turns it into drinking water at a cost of somewhere between $50,000 and $300,000 for the unit, plus ongoing maintenance and energy costs to run it. Now, waste. No sewer line. You need a self-contained septic system, and it needs to pass environmental review because you are surrounded by the ocean and the ocean has regulations. Now the dock. You need a way to get on the island and a way to get things onto the island. Building materials, furniture, food, fuel, people. A basic dock runs $100,000. A dock that can handle a supply barge runs significantly more. And here's the part that breaks the budget every time. Construction costs on a private island are 30 to 60% higher than the mainland because every nail, every 2x4, every bag of cement, every piece of drywall, and every worker has to arrive by boat. And when the weather turns, the boat doesn't come, and the crew sits idle, and you pay them anyway. Add it all up, a $2 million undeveloped island, by the time it has power, water, waste, a dock, and a modest house, has cost you somewhere between $3.5 and $5 million. That is the 1.8 times rule in action, and it is not a worst case. It is the average.
Now let's talk about what it costs every single year after that. Because an island is not a house. A house sits on a street that the city maintains, connected to a grid that the utility runs, and served by a fire department you never think about. An island is a standalone civilization. Every system it has, you own, you maintain, and you pay for. Annual operating costs for a modest, developed private island run roughly $84,000 to $310,000 a year. That covers property tax, which even islands don't escape, at $5,000 to $50,000. Insurance, $10,000 to $50,000, and if you're in a hurricane zone, that number climbs sharply, 2 to 5% of the island's total value annually. Maintenance on the house, the dock, the solar panels, the desalination system, the septic, the landscaping, $30,000 to $100,000. A caretaker, because someone has to be on that island year-round or the jungle takes it back in 18 months, $24,000 to $60,000. Boat operation and fuel for transport, $10,000 to $30,000. And utility system maintenance, $5,000 to $20,000. That's for a modest island. If you have staff, guest houses, a pool, or anything resembling a resort, the number is $500,000 or more. And here's the part that makes people sell. Those costs don't stop when you're not there. You could visit your island twice a year for a total of 3 weeks, and the other 49 weeks still cost you the same. The caretaker still gets paid. The generator still runs. The dock still rots. The insurance doesn't pause. A private island is a subscription you cannot cancel without selling the island. So why does anyone do this? Here is the honest answer, and it's the same reason anyone buys anything with a negative return. Status, privacy, and the specific fantasy of owning a piece of the earth that belongs only to you. But there is one man who figured out how to make the math work, and he did it by accident, and he did it better than anyone before or since. In 1978, a 28-year-old British record label owner was trying to impress a girl. He flew to the British Virgin Islands, visited a handful of islands for sale, fell in love with a 74-acre uninhabited rock called Necker Island, and offered £100,000 for a property listed at $5 million. The owner said no and threw him off the island. He came back. He offered £180,000. The owner, who by now had been unable to sell the island for years, said yes. There was one condition. He had to develop the property. Over the next 3 years, he spent roughly $10 million building Balinese-style villas out of Brazilian hardwoods and Asian antiques on an island that had no power, no water, and no dock. Today, Necker Island rents for over $100,000 per night for a full buyout. It sleeps 48 guests and employs 120 staff. That is 2.5 staff for every guest. Individual rooms are available during certain weeks, starting at around $5,400 per night. That man's name was Richard Branson. He is the only private island owner most people can name, and the reason is simple. He is one of the only private island owners who ever made money. The mistake most people make is assuming Necker is the model. It isn't. Necker is the exception that makes the rule look survivable. The model is what happens to everyone else.
In August 2011, a tropical storm hit the British Virgin Islands, and the great house on Necker Island burned to the ground. Kate Winslet, who was a guest at the time, carried Branson's elderly mother down the stairs and out of the building. That fire alone is estimated to have caused millions in damage. Then, in September 2017, Hurricane Irma, one of the most powerful Atlantic hurricanes ever recorded, made a direct hit on Necker. Branson and his staff sheltered in a concrete wine cellar beneath the rebuilt Great House, while the hurricane stripped buildings to their frames, flipped boats, and blew the contents of entire structures out to sea. He described the devastation afterward as comparable to a nuclear blast. He rebuilt. Again. Because he is a billionaire with an operational resort generating revenue year-round. If you are not a billionaire with a year-round revenue stream, the hurricane does not announce a rebuilding project. It announces the end. And hurricanes are not the only way an island destroys you. In 2017, a 25-year-old New York entrepreneur named Billy McFarland promised several thousand people a luxury music festival on a private island in the Bahamas. Tickets ran from $500 up to $400,000 for VIP packages. Supermodels promoted it on Instagram. Major artists were announced. The pitch was simple: an exclusive experience on a private island with the best food, music, and accommodation money could buy. When ticket holders landed on the island, they found disaster relief tents, cold cheese sandwiches in styrofoam boxes, no musical acts, no security, no medical services, and no way off. The festival collapsed within hours. McFarland was arrested, pleaded guilty to 2 counts of fraud, admitted to using fake documents to secure $26 million in funding, and was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. The lesson of Fyre Festival is not that McFarland was a bad planner. The lesson is that a private island is the single hardest venue on Earth to operate, and even competent people fail at it. Everything that makes an island romantic, the remoteness, the isolation, the distance from the mainland, is also everything that makes it logistically punishing. Every person, every plate, every generator, every toilet, every drop of fuel has to arrive by water or by air. And when either of those stops working, there is no backup. And then there is the story that sits underneath all of this. The one nobody in the private island industry wants to talk about. In 1998, a financier named Jeffrey Epstein purchased a 72-acre island called Little St. James in the U.S. Virgin Islands for roughly $8 million. He later bought the neighboring island, Great St. James, for $22.5 million. Between the 2 islands, he built a compound with a main residence, guest villas, a helipad, a private dock, and a series of structures whose purpose became the subject of a federal investigation. In July 2019, Epstein was charged with sex trafficking. He died in custody a month later. The FBI raided the island. The estate valued the 2 islands collectively at $31 million and listed them for $125 million. Nobody bought them. After more than a year on the market, a private equity billionaire named Stephen Dekoff purchased both islands for $60 million, less than half the asking price. Under the terms of a settlement with the U.S. Virgin Islands government, half of that went into a trust for victims of sexual abuse and human trafficking. What Epstein proved, in the ugliest possible way, is the thing that makes private islands attractive to a certain kind of buyer. They are, by definition, outside the sightline, remote, hard to reach, hard to monitor. And for decades, that privacy was the product. His islands went from $8 million to $125 million asking price to a $60 million fire sale, and as of 2026, no construction had been publicly reported on either property. The most expensive private islands in the Caribbean are, right now, sitting empty, because the name attached to them made the land unsellable at any rational price. An island's value is not in the dirt, it is in the story. And sometimes the story turns, and the value goes to zero overnight. So let's close this out with the actual question. Should you buy one? Here is the math run clean. Scenario 1. You buy a small, undeveloped island in the Bahamas for $1.5 million. You spend another $2 million on infrastructure and a modest house. Your total investment is $3.5 million. Your annual operating costs are somewhere around $150,000 a year. You visit 4 times a year for a total of maybe 6 weeks. You are paying roughly $25,000 per week to be on your own island. For that money, you could rent a private villa on someone else's island with full staff, a chef, and a boat captain. And at the end of the week, you fly home, and the maintenance is someone else's problem. Scenario 2. You build a luxury resort and try to make the island pay for itself. This is the Branson model. Your development cost is now $10 to $50 million. You need staff year-round, a hospitality management team, marketing, booking infrastructure, insurance at resort-level premiums, and regulatory compliance in a foreign jurisdiction. You are no longer an island owner. You are a hotelier who happens to be surrounded by water. And the hotel business has a failure rate that should give any sane person pause.
Scenario 3. You buy the island, do nothing, and hold it as land. Private islands have historically appreciated around 5 to 12% per year in strong markets, but the market for private islands is not the housing market. It is thin, illiquid, and driven almost entirely by sentiment. When you want to sell, you need exactly one buyer, and that buyer needs to want your specific island, in your specific country, at your specific price. The average time on market for a private island is measured in years, not months. So here is the uncomfortable summary. A private island is one of the only assets in the world where the annual cost of ownership can exceed the original purchase price within a decade. It appreciates slowly, if it appreciates at all. It cannot be insured at a reasonable rate in the regions where people actually want to own them. It can be functionally destroyed in a single storm season. And it requires continuous, year-round expenditure whether or not you are standing on it. It is, by every financial measure that exists, a terrible investment. And roughly 12,000 people on Earth own one anyway. Because a private island was never a financial product. It was never an investment thesis. It was a 74-acre answer to a question that no spreadsheet can ask. Can you own a piece of the world that belongs only to you? You can. For roughly $3.5 million, plus $150,000 a year, plus one hurricane you didn't see coming, plus a caretaker who calls you at 2 in the morning because the desalination unit failed and there's no drinking water on the island. That is what paradise actually costs.